2018 was a difficult year to sum up. At times it felt chaotic, at times it felt surreal, at times it felt strangely calm. And in the world of video games, the same rang true. It was a year of sleeper hits and astounding disappointments. As old heroes returned, juggernauts began their streak, and veteran studios took major missteps. The news surrounding games was just as varied, with developer acquisitions preceding massive studio closures. Conversations arose about working conditions and harmful company cultures, and each new day kept us on our toes. That's why I waited for 2018 to officially be over before making this video. It was one of those years that you can only see clearly in the rearview mirror. Right off the bat, Monster Hunter World transformed Capcom's cult role-playing series into a commercial hit. The newest entry brought the franchise to Sony and Microsoft consoles as well as PC, selling 11 million copies as of last fall. It's now Capcom's best-selling game ever, stealing the crown from the long-reigning Resident Evil 5. And who among us doesn't remember playing God of War, slowly realizing that Santa Monica Studio had taken one of video games' most generic characters and given him profound depth? God of War would go on to win numerous Game of the Year accolades at IGN, Polygon, and the Game Awards show, marking a turning point for a franchise that, a few years ago, was all but dead. Speaking of redeemed characters, 2018 also saw the return of Marvel's web-slinging superhero, as Insomniac's Spider-Man accrued nominations and awards. It drew comparisons to 2004's revered Spider-Man 2, with thrilling movement mechanics, frenetic combat, and a surprisingly gripping story. It marked a renaissance for the Marvel character, but also the developer itself, harkening back to its halcyon days with Ratchet & Clank, Resistance, and Spyro. And as one last note on Spider-Man, it's also the fastest-selling PlayStation exclusive of all time. Staying in the realm of sales, veteran developer Rockstar Games released its long-awaited Red Dead Redemption 2, and as is customary with the studio's titles, saw sales of ludicrous proportions. It sold 17 million copies to customers and retailers in its first 12 days, and outsold the lifetime sales of the first Red Dead Redemption, an 8-year-old game, in its first 8 days. But Red Dead 2 was risky in terms of design. Rockstar's newest release forces you to take your time, plan your travels, and move at a slow, deliberate pace. As Westerns go, it's more of a lonesome dove than a 310 to Yuma. And in GameSpot's humble correct opinion, this approach paid off.
Would you just look around you? This world has its consolations.
The aforementioned games all succeeded in one way or another, be it critical adoration or commercial records, but 2018 was not without its AAA missteps. In March, iconic developer Rare released its multiplayer game Sea of Thieves. And while its premise had promise, it soon became clear that most of its appeal rested on the surface. Sea of Thieves has its advocates, and Rare has worked to expand it after its release, but by and large, its bare-bones design made it an afterthought as the months passed. A similar scenario occurred later in the year as Bethesda Game Studios made its own pivot into the multiplayer sphere. Fallout 76 released with an array of boring quests, a lifeless world, and a slew of bugs to boot. Many players lost their save files completely. Within 2 weeks of its release, Fallout 76 had drawn the ire of Redditors, Steam users, and longtime Bethesda fans alike. For all the ups and downs of the AAA release cycle, 2018 was defined just as much, if not more, by its phenomenal indie lineup. In January, developers Matt Thorsten and Noel Berry, along with a small team, released Celeste, the demanding 2D platformer that doubles as a parable about living with mental health. Like the best games of its genre, it expertly introduces new mechanics throughout the playthrough, morphing a simple premise into a complex video game. Shortly thereafter, Subset Games released Into the Breach. It plays like a dangerous game of chess, strewn with explosives, hulking mechs, and vicious kaiju across several locales. It's a stunning display of effective simplicity that remains exciting after hundreds of hours. After about a year in early access, developer Motion Twin released its roguelike darling, Dead Cells, to critical acclaim. Its seamless blend of 2D combat, Metroidvania exploration, and RPG weapon progression made it one of the year's best releases. It's one of those games that's rewarding every step of the way. Several months after, Return of the Obra Dinn became the sleeper hit among the rush of holiday releases. Created by Papers, Please developer Lucas Pope, Obra Dinn places players in the shoes of an insurance agent investigating the disappearance of the titular ship's crew. With supernatural elements, a fragmented narrative, and clever time travel abilities, it's being lauded as one of the best detective games to date. As for one of the year's best games that didn't actually release in 2018, Hollow Knight made its way to Nintendo Switch, drawing far more attention than its 2017 PC release. It combines an ominous, foreboding world with challenging combat and a refusal to hold players' hands. It was one of several titles that found new life on Nintendo's portable console. It's funny because Nintendo was actually criticized for its plethora of third-party releases. Many accused the company of padding an otherwise quiet year outside of Pokémon Let's Go, Super Mario Party, Mario Tennis Aces, and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. But to me, Nintendo's third-party lineup was one of 2018's bright spots. It not only let me play some of my favorite games on the go, but it also rekindled my love for games I had already poured dozens of hours into. Microsoft's exclusive portfolio was once again sparse, with the excellent Forza Horizon 4 and the underrated State of Decay 2 picking up much of the slack left by Sea of Thieves. But upon taking a closer look, it's clear that Microsoft actually had a great year. It released its new adaptive controller, allowing passionate fans with disabilities to further enjoy the games they love. It made good on its promise of more backwards compatibility, adding numerous classics to the Xbox One's library. It also brought millions of players into its Netflix-like subscription service, Game Pass. And finally, Microsoft made several massive studio acquisitions, adding veterans such as Obsidian, Ninja Theory, and Undead Labs to its first-party team. Sony, on the other hand, relied almost entirely on its exclusives. The success of Spider-Man and God of War aside, PS4 also served as a home for Ni no Kuni 2, Detroit: Become Human, Yakuza 6, and Yakuza Kiwami 2. Bluepoint Games also gave Shadow of the Colossus a fantastic remaster, bringing the classic back to gorgeous life. And of course, this list would not be complete without Tetris Effect. Developers Resonair and Monstars revived the legendary title to universal acclaim. It's a dazzling display of sight, sound, and euphoric sensory overload, and it's all the more effective in VR. In fact, 2018 was strewn with excellent VR titles. Tetris Effect drew the most attention, but we also had Moss, Firewall Zero Hour, Beat Saber, and the astonishing Astrobot Rescue Mission. As opposed to previous years, VR developers seemed less concerned with releasing proofs of concept and more focused on just releasing incredible games. I don't think it's bold to say that 2018 was the best year for VR to date. For all of the news that emerged, 2018 was also a sobering reminder that there are thousands of people behind the games we play. In August, Kotaku published an article about the sexist culture at League of Legends developer Riot Games. Reporter Cecilia D'Anastasio spoke to 28 current and former employees whose accounts painted the picture of an environment hostile toward women. The phrase bro culture cropped up on several different occasions. Women often felt degraded and objectified, and numerous cases of alleged sexual misconduct came out in these interviews. Following the report, Riot claimed it would double its efforts to investigate claims of harassment in the workplace. But in December, when the company suspended COO Scott Gelb for 2 months of unpaid leave, many Riot employees felt the punishment was too soft. Gelb was said to regularly harass employees, perpetuating a fraternity mindset based around bathroom humor. In its alleged efforts to right the ship, Riot still clearly has problems to address. And in the case of Rockstar Games, the conversation about working conditions took on a very different form. In October, New York Magazine published a feature about the making of Red Dead Redemption 2. The publication spoke at length with Dan Houser, Rockstar's co-founder and lead writer, about the effort put into the massive Western. In a now infamous quote, Houser said the team spent multiple 100-hour weeks to bring Red Dead 2 to fruition. Houser later clarified he was only referring to the core writers in this quote. And after speaking with dozens of former and current Rockstar members, Kotaku's Jason Schreier published a story about this culture of crunch. The reports, as Schreier wrote, were complicated and sometimes contradictory. Many Rockstar employees didn't work overtime. Others did, but found it to be rewarding. Others still said the job cost them their closest relationships and that the studio fostered a mentality in which weekends and nights were expected of them. Rockstar's studio culture became the focus of the ongoing discussion about the ethics of crunch. And of course, the discussion did not end with Red Dead's gargantuan release. In the wake of the game's success, questions arose regarding how much of the game's affecting narrative and obsessive amount of detail were a result of overtime. Is crunch necessary to make games of this nature? Will things change in the future? How many other AAA studios might have practices like this that we have no idea about? 2018 was a reminder that these questions and the stories of numerous employees with diverse backgrounds are just as important as the games themselves. We witnessed the end of Telltale Games in September. Reports of poor management and that same pervasive crunch emerged. 250 employees showed up for work one day and only hours later discovered they had lost their jobs. Crunch culture may not have been the only cause, but it was a cause nonetheless. It's easy to remember 2018 as a grim year. For every game that elevated the medium, just as much bad news seemed to bring it back down. But in moving forward, it's important to recognize the bright spots as well. Not just the examples of what not to do, but also the ones that show us how things can be done. French developer Motion Twin, creator of indie darling Dead Cells, stresses work-life balance as its main pillar. It has no seniority, it has no executives, each member makes the same salary as the next. And of course, the studio also made one of 2018's best games. Motion Twin is much smaller than the AAA companies with problematic, deep-rooted working conditions. But regardless, Dead Cells is a challenge to the rest of the games industry. It's proof that success doesn't require crunch and rigid hierarchies. It's an example of a healthy studio making a stellar piece of entertainment. Elsewhere in the games industry, hope endured. In the wake of Telltale's closing, numerous developers rallied to support the affected employees. Ubisoft hosted a job fair in the Bay Area. Naughty Dog, Sony Bend, and Santa Monica Studio shared their job listings as well. As Firaxis Games continues to work on its next project, creative director Jake Solomon espoused Telltale's impact on the medium, and he also shared job listings of his own. Above all, 2018 was a massive reminder that people make games, that people play them, and that people share them. And it's worth looking back in order to move forward. So here's to more improvements in 2019 and another year of video games.